Just watch me now.
Welcome to Up My Hockey with Jason Podolin, where we deconstruct the NHL journey, discuss what it takes to make it, and have a few laughs along the way. I'm your host, Jason Podolin, a 31st overall draft pick who played 41 NHL games, but thought he was destined for 1,000. Learn from my story and those of my guests. This is a hockey podcast about reaching your potential. Hello and welcome back to Up My Hockey for episode number 24. And today we tried something new. I brought the podcast into my Facebook parent group and we recorded live within the parent group. So this is a special group for members only that I talk about mindset and talk about the path and how to help these young athletes succeed and to navigate this route of hockey that all of us are so passionate about. And I felt that it'd be amazing to bring the podcast recording inside the group so the members there can reach out, ask their own questions, and participate live while I'm having the conversation. So I felt it went quite well, really well, actually, so well that I'm going to do it again. So for any of you out there that are hockey parents and would like to take part in the group, please do. It's Up My Hockey parent group on Facebook, and you can have access to some of these amazing guests that I've been speaking to and ask your questions personally, and obviously get to hear the episode before anyone else does. So a little bit about Mark. Mark Ferner played junior for the Kamloops Blazers before he embarked on his 15-year professional career. Mark also spent time in the AHL, the IHL, the DEL over in Germany, and also the NHL with the Buffalo Sabres, the Washington Capitals. He was on the first ever Anaheim Mighty Ducks team and also the Detroit Red Wings. He had an extensive career and seen a ton of different leagues and played with a ton of great players, which we get into. And upon his retirement as a player, Mark went back to the WHL and with the startup Vancouver Giants was an assistant coach there. Then went over to Kamloops, back to his hometown with the Blazers, and he was assistant coach there and got his first head coaching job in the WHL there. But Mark really stepped into some greatness when he went on to coach in the BC Junior League for the Vernon Vipers, where he did something that a lot of coaches can't do, and that is go to 3 consecutive national championships, and they won both, or the first 2, and in the third, they outshot the team 40-20, and it was one of those games where this couldn't get a puck past the opposing goaltender, and they couldn't win the third one in a row. But what a super, super cool accomplishment. And for those of you who don't know, the Vernon Vipers and the BCHL that league is one of the top producing leagues for athletes to the NCAA program. There's a ton of scholarships delivered there, so it's a really, really good hockey league. Most recently, Mark served as a member or as an amateur scout for the Buffalo Sabres. So now he's seen it as a player, he was seen it as a coach, and he also seen it on the other side trying to identify talent. I first met Mark after a trade to the Los Angeles Kings. The Kings initially assigned me to their IHL affiliate in Long Beach, and Mark was playing there and was 11 years older than me, a veteran and a leader for that team. And Mark, I remember him, if we didn't have done this interview, he's one of those guys that I remembered because he made me feel comfortable in part of things while I was there. He went out of his way to walk across the room and to make sure that I knew where to go for lunch and where to go on the road. And it's those little gestures that make a man memorable outside of the realm of hockey. And little did either of us know that 7 years later, Mark would be coaching a junior team in my hometown. And that's the way hockey works. It's a small world. And it reminds you constantly that being a good human matters. Because once your career is done, all you have left are the memories and the relationships that you made along the way. So Mark, I'm very thankful that he was able to join us today. It was super cool that we were able to do this live within the Facebook group. And Mark brings a treasure trove of experience with him as a guest. He has seen it all, knows what it takes to succeed in the sport, knows how to communicate the message to this younger generation, this Y generation. They don't want to know how, they want to know why we're doing it. And he talks about that in this episode. So we also hear a couple great stories from him. So this is an interview you don't want to miss. Thanks for tuning in. And without further ado, I bring you Mr. Mark Ferner. All right, welcome to Up My Hockey. This is episode number 24, and with us today is Mr. Mark Ferner. Fernsey, thanks so much for being here.
Jason, thanks for having me. I look forward to this. I appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Awesome. So we just talked a little bit offline that Mark is not a tech savvy guy and hasn't really participated in any of these things. So I'm really grateful that you're here, Mark. We'll make this as painless as possible. I know you have a ton of stuff just in our own conversations that we've had that is valuable experiential stuff from your time as a player, from your time as a coach, and from your time as being a scout with the Sabres as well. So in researching this, Fernsey, I went back and I saw your draft, 1983, 10th rounder. But which is interesting at the time because 10th round in that day and age equated to 194, which really isn't that, low of a pick. It's just there's less teams, right? So there was way more rounds. And I just was curious if you knew who went 199 in that draft.
Oh, 199. From my understanding, that was a pretty good draft. I don't know. I'm gonna throw it out there, Jason. Rick Tocchet.
You know who? Hall of Famer, 5 picks lower than you. Dominic Hasek went 199, and I saw that and I laughed. And then I saw as well at 186 was the man who I played my first ever NHL shift against, lined up against him after a face-off, offside face-off, and it was Stu Grimson. So you're surrounded there. You're sandwiched in the middle of Stu Grimson and Dominic Hasek, and I thought that was a pretty cool scenario to be 5 picks higher than Mr. Hasek. You have to use that at the next party you go to.
I think our careers went in different directions, that's for sure. But you know what? Stu is a good friend of mine. I played with him a couple different places. He's a Kamloops kid. I grew up in Kamloops, so we played minor ball together, and it was a pleasure playing with Stu, that's for sure.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I mean, you can imagine me at 20 years old and my first time stepping on the ice, and I'm looking against, I mean, I'm not small, but like he was big, like his hip is up ahead of mine, and I was just like, don't look at him. It was pretty funny way to start my NHL or my pro career, I guess.
A real gentleman, though. Like for what he was on the ice, he was just a true gentleman off the ice. I mean, very well spoken. I think he's a lawyer now. But back in those days, he was huge. I mean, I think 6'5" possibly. I mean, now every team's got a handful of those players. But the one thing, he brought that intangible of a little bit of intimidation, that's for sure.
Oh yeah, darn straight he did. You mentioned Kamloops, so that'd be a great place to start. I want to start with you and your career, and it started in Kamloops with the Blazers, or I mean they were called the Junior Oilers, but the Blazers, and so that was where you grew up. That was where like the hockey eyes of that junior team were on you, and that gave you an opportunity to play in your hometown.
Not necessarily, to be honest with you. I was originally, back then there was no draft, right? So it was just your 50-man list. So I was listed by Regina. And there was a handful of us that went from Regina to Kamloops. Bill LaForge came in and was our head coach for 2 years with the Kamloops Oilers, which was owned by the Edmonton Oilers at the time. So I played as a 17-year-old in Kamloops. I was traded back to Kamloops. And then 2 years later, obviously, it transitioned into the Kamloops Blazers, where Ken Hitchcock came in and out of midget hockey out of Edmonton, and I had the opportunity and pleasure of playing for Hitch for the 1 year there too.
Interesting. Well, so that was the start. Well, maybe I don't know how your year went that year with Hitch, but I mean he ended up having some powerhouses there and really put his name on the map with coaching Robbie Brown and Scott Niedermeyer and Shazowski and that whole crew. What was when he arrived on the scene? Could you see that there was maybe going to be some big things for him in the future?
We the previous year we had gone to the Memorial Cup, and rest his soul, Bill LaForge. He was an old school coach for sure. And then we had this big jolly guy coming in, Ken Hitchcock, and we thought we had died and gone to heaven with that mentality. But again, back then there was no draft. The one thing that they had a great scouting staff. I mean, Stu McGregor was there, Bob Brown was there, Hitch was there, Donnie Hay had come in. But the one advantage that they did have was they Kamloops held the Kibet tournament, the Bantam tournament, which was one of the better ones in North America. So, I think they got Shane Doan out of there. I think they got Jerome McGinley out of there. I mean, they had Daryl Sador. And the biggest thing I could see from that organization is Hitch held them accountable, but the culture was phenomenal. And I think they went back-to-back Memorial Cups. Maybe they even went 3 times, but that was certainly a heyday for the Kamloops Blazers back then.
Right. So, yeah, I mean, that's and because Hitch wasn't recognized as the pushover in the NHL, he was actually recognized as a little bit of a hard case in some points. But I mean, for you, and then for the listeners too that aren't familiar with Ken Hitchcock was a huge man back in the day of junior. I remember going to some of the junior camps as a young man, and I mean, he couldn't honestly tie his skates; you could barely see him. I mean, that was. Was he at that size when he first got hired there? When you were there?
He was big. He was a big man, and his heart was just as big. Back then there wasn't what you would call a player's coach, but he certainly was a player's coach to us. And it's real funny that I had the opportunity to coach in Kamloops for a while too, but they have all their photos there. And year one, you saw Hitch with a great big smile on his face, but every year that those photos were taken, that smile slowly went away. And up to this day, Hitch is still a good friend of mine, and he did tremendous things with his coaching career for sure.
Right. Yeah. That's well, I mean, that's the evolution, right? I mean, you start out one way, and I'm sure you experienced that not only as a player, but then as a coach too. You got to find what your identity is and how you fit into the whole scheme of things. Plus you learn what works and what doesn't. From those Kamloops days, Fernsey. So, how did that transition into pro work for you? Like, for it's a big step for a lot of guys. Like, do you remember your first NHL camp? Do you remember those first games in the AHL?
I do. My first training camp was, believe it or not, was in Lake Placid, just a few years after Miracle on Ice. And Richard Haidu was a second-round pick to Buffalo, and he had played in Kamloops as well. Ended up getting traded to Victoria, but I remember going to training camp. I mean, what was I, 6 foot, 170 pounds, and guys like Jerry Korab and Gilbert Perreault and these guys were still there. And the one thing that just blew my mind is Gilbert Perreault was 230 pounds. But it was all legs and rear end. So here we are trying to put weight on, and the veteran players are trying to take weight off. But it was a different time back then for sure. Not a lot of testing. We had to run around the lake a couple of times during that training camp. But it was certainly a thrill for me, and I'm sure all the young players to see these types of players at training camp. Yeah.
And that was a big name, Gilbert Perreault. I actually saw that he was part of that organization towards the tail end of his career, but a magnificent goal scorer and a great player in his own right. And interesting enough, Lake Placid, you mentioned, I when I was with the Islanders, we had our training camp in Lake Placid, and that was the year of 9/11. So we had just left the city. I think it was the day before, if I remember correctly, and we were on the ice, and that was when I got back from a morning skate, and it was all over the TV, and like the rest of camp was a blur. I mean, like we finished camp, but it was crazy. So it's interesting we have that in common of having an NHL training camp in Lake Placid. Do you remember your first like exhibition game, or is there any takeaways from even like a camp where you had an aha moment that, oh, this is a little different than the Blazers?
Well, again, back in the 80s, it was a little bit different. There was just as much emphasis on big, tough guys as there was nowadays with speed and skill. I mean, Lindy Ruff was there. The nicknames back in those days were tremendous. King Kong Korab, Boxcar Hospodar. But, it was different. I remember a training camp, and you never wanted to be seen in the training room, right? That was just a taboo. And I remember we were scrimmaging, and Ed Hospodar was coming across the middle. I thought, here's me, 170 pounds, would step up on him, and he saw me at the last minute and threw his elbow out and caught me pretty good in the jaw. But I think I ate soup for the next 2 weeks, but I didn't want to say anything. So it was just a different time back then. It really was. So it certainly was an eye opener. Obviously didn't play in Buffalo that year, went down to Rochester, and we had a young group down there. But my first shift as a pro in the minors, I believe it or not, I started the game for whatever reason. John Van Boxmeer was the coach. Won the face off to my partner. He went D to D to me, and I thought, oh gee, I can find that seam cross ice. Sure enough, picked off breakaway goal. So that was my introduction to pro hockey. I was -1 in about 15 seconds.
Oh my goodness! Welcome to the pros, kid.
Yeah, no
That's
kidding.
wild. I love that story. And interesting that you mentioned Boxy, because that's where we played with under him in Long Beach. So the hockey world's like that, right? He must have probably saw something in you there and ended up playing for him again. You mentioned the training room, and I just want to differentiate, because I think for a lot of people listening now, the training room would mean like the workout room, but you were mentioning you didn't want to be on a trainer's table, like you didn't want to be hurt, like you were going to avoid that at all costs.
100%. I mean, the GM would come in and he would poke his head in the room just to see who was in there. I mean, nowadays it's a social place. That's where everyone kind of gathers, and but back then it was you try to avoid that room as much as possible, because the decisions were being made. Who's going where, and it was all about character, as it is now, but it was just different times for sure.
Yeah, exactly. And I would like to talk about the flip side of that, because you said it was an era. The era was just kind of starting to shift as far as like the physical realm of hockey, right? And what you can do with your body away from the rink that's going to make you a better hockey player on the ice. Was the weight room visited by many people then? Do you remember? Was there guys that were kind of a little ahead of their time, or was that also a place that was a little bit avoided?
A little bit. Especially in the minors when I was there, our Boxy actually built a weight room for us, and us being smart Alex, we put a dartboard down there. But guys would go to work out. Obviously, we had bikes, but not like today. I mean, the game's evolved so much. I mean, it's a 12 months of the year thing where, you'd go to training camp. The veterans would go to training camp to get in shape. That's what it was. Make sure you bring your golf clubs, and and it was different for sure.
Right. I remember talking to Tom Laidlaw, who was, a little bit before, but from a similar era. And he said, he did take his physical, he was a little bit ahead of the curve with that. And he remembers that guys just weren't happy with him at all. Right. And once the younger guys started coming in a little bit more in shape, right, the older guys weren't happy about it, because that just wasn't the culture at the time. Right. They liked their summers off and wanted to come in and get in shape, but that's obviously changed now. It's pretty much a 12-month of a year job for these guys. When you made that step and you said you're -1 your first shift, I also noticed that your penalty minutes went up a lot the next year. Like, were you trying to find a way to play there, or I mean, what do you remember what that was like finding your way in the league, and what type of, were you a 1 or 2 guy? Were you a 5-6 guy? And to keep yourself in the lineup, what did you have to do there to make that work?
Well, we were a young hockey team in Rochester, and I think that's just the way the Sabres organization was going. I think we had like 15 rookies at the time. And again, going into places like Hershey back then, where they had a veteran group and they were big, and it was still the Broad Street Bullies up in Philadelphia, and they mirrored that in Hershey as well. So it was just, you basically at times had no choice. Not that, guys would shy away from it. It was a real physical era back then. And that's just the way it was. There was a tremendous amount of respect, though. That's the one thing that I can say. Like, no one really took advantage of anybody, but at the same time, there were certain buildings that you're going into, and it's going to hit the fan, and you got to be prepared. So that was just the way the game was played.
Right. Was there a part of that for you on a personal level? And I'll just maybe share a little bit with myself first. Like, I played in Penticton at 15 years old in junior A, right, in the BCHL, and so that was the first time where I could get in a fight necessarily, right? And I got in a couple that year. Wasn't that I loved it, but it was also part of sort of the culture, to a little bit of a proving ground, right? That you would do this. And then the next year in Spokane, I actually found myself, I had like 15 fights as a 16-year-old. And again, not necessarily because I liked it, but more just to try to establish yourself that this is something that you would do, and you'd stand up for a teammate, and and that you were one of the boys, I guess, essentially. Like, did you find yourself having to maybe change your personality or what you would normally do because of the sport you were playing?
I think that stuff gets ingrained into you at a young age. I do. I mean, obviously growing up in Kamloops, and we had a real hard-nosed minor hockey coach in Joe Tennant, who coached junior A hockey way back when. And then again, Bill LaForge was notorious for that. So I think that really prepared you for what was going to come down the pipe here a little bit. And it was just the way it was. I mean, certainly your personality, and I think a lot of kids or a lot of people would play to their character, and sometimes my mouth would get myself into a little bit more trouble than it should have. But at the same time, it's a team game, and you're on one side, and obviously the 20 guys are on the other. So you had to be prepared to go to war every night.
Yeah. Do you find now that you've gone through it as a player, you've gone through it as a coach, and now there's a different style being played again now, as you watch as a scout this past season? I lamented a little bit. I went to a game in Vancouver, I think it was 2 years ago now, with my boys, and I was just kind of getting back into really being a hockey fan and a part of the game again, right? I was watching a little bit, but I was busy with business and everything else. And so we went to this game for the Canucks, and it was the third period, and I looked over at my wife and I said, "Has there been a hit yet tonight?" Like there wasn't a body check. Like there wasn't an ounce of physicality in the game at all. And then I started to watch a little bit more, and it was, it really stuck out to me. You can take a puck off the half wall, and these guys have no fear of getting hit, standing in front of the net. No one's cross-checking or slashing or anything, right? And I was like, it kind of made me feel sad, because that was a part of the game that I really took pride in on a personal level, that I was able to do those things. I was able to stand in front of the net and take the hit. I was able to drop the gloves or get the puck out on the half wall. It was something that I took pride in, and now it kind of looked like that was lost in the game a little bit. I don't know. Like, do you have your thoughts on that as a coach and a player?
A little bit. I would imagine that it's nearly or not nearly as physical. And I think where it turned, this is just my opinion. They're so much bigger. They're so much faster. The boards are, the glass nowadays. It's everything, the equipment's bigger and harder, but the obstruction, when they put obstruction in the game, obviously you thought the game was going to pick up and get faster, which it did. But taking advantage of players, like there were some pretty nasty hits about 10 years ago. And it's so ironic with this virus that's going on, and sports has been shut down. So as you know, Jason, TSN and Sportnet been playing some old NHL games. I was watching Edmonton and Calgary play. I think it had to be from the 80s, and it was barbaric. It really was. It wasn't as fast as today, but there was a tremendous amount of respect, but it was a real physical, hard, ref standing right there, guys getting two-handed. So, the game's evolved. It really has. Obviously we're getting more and more Europeans over here, and rightfully so. Obviously they're very talented players, but you just don't have that physicality and they're, or even the fighting for that matter. Very rarely do you have multiple fights in a game. And you just see, unfortunately for those types of players, if that's how they're making their living, they're getting weeded out of the game a little bit.
Yeah, 100%. And I think there's a bunch of traditionalists that think that that's sad. I'm not really sure where I stand. I think that we could all probably agree in, however many years there won't be fighting in hockey at some point. I think that's coming at the NHL level. BCHL has just made a rule this year, making it a little bit harder to fight. And so as it comes up from the junior leagues right into the NHL, I think it will be gone. But I think the fighting is neither here nor there, although I do think it's a pretty relevant component, and I'd like to see it stay. But for me, I think the playoffs is still where we get that edge, and it's that edge that I guess that I'm talking about, is where, you gotta be willing to pay the price to make a play, and that's the old adage that coaches have been saying forever. But again, watching that game in the NHL, it seemed like you didn't have to pay the price to make the play. You just had to be skilled and maybe be quick, but you didn't have to worry about getting ran over. You didn't have to worry about that ice bag, and I think in the playoffs we still see that, and I think that's the best part of the game for sure.
Well, and I agree. I mean, I'm not going to say that the NHL is a copycat league, but St. Louis, they go from last to first and wins the Stanley Cup, and they were big. They were big and physical. Their back end was big. They were hard. They defended real hard. But I think the biggest difference is during the regular season, you'll play one team. And then you'll move on, you'll play another team. Or in the playoffs, you possibly could be playing the same team for 7 games in a row. And that's where it becomes hard. There's no stone unturned anymore. With the coaching is outstanding, the way technology is, the video and all that stuff. So that all gets looked after. And the reality is now it comes down to, again, I mentioned a little bit earlier, the guys that you want to go to war with. So it's a lot of character is put into the game, and you need good goaltending, you need good defense, and you need good luck to win. And I think St. Louis got it all last year.
Yeah, and I mean I agree. And if you go back to the teams that surface to the top, there's a lot of grit in that lineup. It's not a bunch of first line power play guys all the time, right? I mean, like you think Boston, you think Washington when they won, even the Pittsburgh teams, right? I mean, there's some grit in there, and I guess you're having some discussions with some of the people in the game that are trying to design these teams. They're very cognizant of the fact that what wins in the regular season isn't what necessarily wins in the playoffs. But yet, if you design your team strictly around what wins in the playoffs, you might not even get to the dance in the first place.
That's a great point. Obviously, you need to be skilled enough to get there, but you need to be hard enough to survive that war, that battle. I mean, and it's hard. It's 10 weeks of playoffs that you're playing every second night, and you get worn down. And you, as you know, Jason, better than anyone, I mean, injuries are part of the game. And it's just who's prepared to do the things that other players aren't prepared to do to give yourself a chance to win. I mean, and that's why they say it's the hardest cup to win, hardest championship to win, just because of the regular season and the playoffs. So, I have the utmost respect for all those players that can survive that. That's for sure.
No doubt. Did you ever have any? You said you went to the Memorial Cup there with Kamloops. Did you get into the Calder at all with in the minors?
I was fortunate, to be honest with you. We went to the Memorial Cup with Kamloops, and that's the year actually Mary Lemieux was there. That was his draft year as well. But ironically, he wasn't the best player there. Adam Creighton, who was Buffalo first-round pick, won the MVP of that out of Ottawa, I believe. But getting back to your point, I was fortunate. Played 4 years in Rochester and went to Washington's farm team in Baltimore, and then ended up getting traded to St. John's, and we ended up going to the Calder Cup there. Joe Quinville and Mark Crawford were our coaches. So I got traded at the deadline. Then the next year I got picked up in the expansion draft to Ottawa. Blew my knee out in training camp. Didn't play till December. Ended up going down to New Haven and again an expansion team in the minors. We weren't a very good hockey team, and my agent ended up getting me traded out to San Diego, of all places, in the International League at the time, where Rick Dudley was the coach. And we ended up going to Turner Cup that year. I had an opportunity to go to the Stanley Cup with Detroit. Stu Grimson and I got traded out of Anaheim. I went to the Stanley Cup and lost 4 straight to New Jersey. And again, had two other opportunities to go to the Turner Cup, one in Orlando and one back in Long Beach. So, I had a pretty good stretch there from 91 to 97. I had the opportunity to go to five finals.
That's unbelievable. And championships or runner-up?
We were runner-up, yeah. Obviously didn't win the Memorial Cup. We lost to, who was it, Sherbrooke in St. John's, and Fort Wayne in San Diego. So obviously New Jersey and Detroit, Detroit in the I believe it was, Orlando, and then I think it would have been Houston in the Turner Cup in the last year in Long Beach. But then as a coach, had an opportunity to go to 3 World Bank Cups, which was
Yeah, no, I want to get there
well.
for sure. We share that as well. I got to three finals, one in the DEL, one in the Calder Cup with Bridgeport, and then also with the Chiefs, and ironically as a black ace with the Panthers, and we got swept by Colorado. So got to 4 different championship finals, but was never able to raise the hardware either, and that's a long way to go to not be able to do it. But you definitely learn a hell of a lot along the way. And I think that the margin for error there is like you said, there's a lot that goes into it. And, you can break it down, but you're close, man. And those teams, you remember those guys in those teams too, because you've won so many battles together and you stuck together for so long that it's a very memorable part of the playing experience and as a coach, I'm sure.
Well, and I was fortunate. I had great coaches throughout my whole career. But the one thing that really made me realize when Stu Grimson and I got traded to Detroit from Anaheim, I'm thinking to myself, well, what am I doing in this deal? Like, let's just be honest. We know why Stu's going, right? They had Yzerman, they had Coffey, they had Fedorov. The team was outstanding, and Mark Howe was there. But the one thing that I really enjoyed, obviously, I didn't play in the playoffs there. But like you said, being a black ace and you practice with them and you're a part of it, and they certainly made you feel part of it. Watching Steve Yzerman run that hockey team. That's the first time I saw an NHL team really dedicate themselves off the ice. But the one that led the group there was Scotty Bowman, and just taking everything in from him. Like you said, you learn so much on. And at that point, I knew at some point I wanted to be a coach too. So, I absorbed so much from all the coaches that I've had, and once the coach or the playing career ended, you just try to instill a little bit of everything. So it was very, very rewarding, even though that we didn't win.
Yeah, wasn't he? He's an encyclopedia. I'm talking about Scotty now. Like anytime I've heard him speak, and I've heard him speak live a couple times, and I can't fact check him, but he sounds like he remembers like 1963 in the second period of this game, like it just happened. You know what I mean? And his memory just seems incredible.
Where it blew my mind. It was not so much faces and names; it was numbers for him. He knew everybody. If you said who's number 9 off Notre Dame University, he would tell you who it is. So that's how his mind worked. And it was all about numbers. And obviously, I'm not sure how many Stanley Cups he has, but he has more than any other coach. And there's a reason for it, for sure. He was really enjoyable to be around, very friendly. You didn't see him a whole bunch, though. You would see him, he'd step on the ice. And as soon as practice was over, he was gone. And you never really saw him. But I have a funny story. My very first skate with Detroit, and I'm in the room, and I'm like, what the heck is going on here? So, and they were very friendly, very, welcoming. And I step on the ice, and here's Paul Coffey buzzing around the ice, and he'd come up and, say what he needed to say to me. So it's him and I kind of skating around, and sure enough, I'm looking at him, he's looking at me. We run right into Scotty Bowman and knock him down. But Paul took off. and here I am, just got there, standing over Scotty Bowman. And fortunately for me, when I got drafted by Buffalo, Scotty was a coach there as well. So, what a great welcoming to Detroit. Joe Louis Arena, and here's a new guy that he thinks, and it wasn't me, trust me, that knocked Scotty Bowman over on the ice. And then Terry Karkner came up to me later and goes, "That's okay, Mark. I ran him over last year and broke a rib." So, that was pretty interesting. And
oh my goodness, that's crazy. I got to rewind a little bit just because, for my personal reasons, one being Mario Lemieux, you having a chance to play against him in the Memorial Cup, like he was my guy growing up, right? Like that was the guy that if he existed now and I was a young guy, like I would be glued to YouTube every day and watching his stuff. Like I absorbed everything that he could do. He was my hero. Like you said he wasn't the best player there, but was he? You must have saw how special he was.
Well, I shouldn't say he wasn't the best player there. He didn't win the MVP. I mean, Ottawa won the cup that year, and Adam Creighton was on that team, so he got the MVP. But I remember there was a shift and Gordy Mark was my D partner who played in New Jersey a little bit, big man, and obviously not as big as Mario, but I'm standing in front of the net, and Mario is turning Gordy Mark into a pretzel into the corner. Like I'm just standing going, thank goodness that's not being there. But there's no question that you knew he was going to be great. He had everything. He was big. He could skate. He was skilled. He could, hold guys off. He was one of, you'd have to argue one of the best players to ever play the game. Obviously, I'm not sure where he ranks, but he's got to be up there.
Yeah, I agree. And just to mention for everyone listening here on the podcast, this is our first live broadcast. So right now we're broadcasting live within my parent group on Facebook. It's called Up My Hockey Parent Group. So we're live in there, and we have parents from all over North America as a part of this group, and some of which are from Newfoundland, because I spent some time there as well. I'm not sure if you knew that, Mark.
Yeah,
2.5 years there in Newfoundland. So we do have somebody commenting saying, I remember when Mark played for the Leafs. It was my first year in the front office, and they're really excited that you're on today. Do you have any special memories from your time in the Rock? I know for me personally, it really was a special time. I mean, I had personal success there. I loved the people. I just thought the island itself was like unlike any other part of Canada that I'd been to, and yeah, I mean, I really did treasure my time there. Played in all parts of North America, as did you, and that just, my time in St. John's really stands out for me.
I echo that 100%, Jason. I was traded from Baltimore, Maryland, and I think it was plus 50 the day I got traded. I woke up in St. John's and it was minus 40. But I don't think I've met friendlier people in the world. My wife had come a little bit later. She stayed in Baltimore until I got settled, and they put me up in a bed and breakfast. And I just remember us going on the road trips, and we had a great team. We ended up going to the Calder Cup final Calder Cup final. But I'd come home from road trips, and my wife she'd walk down to the wharf and buy lobsters right off the boat. And we played in the old rink then.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, and it was just. My wife and I always say that we would love to go back in the summer because we had just a terrific time there. Unfortunately, we lost in 7 games, and Jason, that series we had home ice advantage. We lost in 7. We lost 4 games at home.
Oh,
we won 3 on the road and we lost 4 at home, which I don't know if that's ever happened.
I don't know if it would happen, especially in that rink, like you say. That rink was such an advantageous place to play as a Leaf, because it was a little box. Like the fans were right on top of you, and it was a pretty good home rink to have.
It was crazy. It was that was really a tough pill to swallow, because it was a tremendous team, talent-wise, but so close off the ice too. And I think. The teams that you've had success with as a player, that's the one common thread, that you had good people within that organization. And, Joe Quenneville was still a player coach back then, believe it or not. He still wore his plastic skates, and guys would tease him that he was the fastest guy in plastic because he was the only one that wore plastic. And then Mark Crawford went on to Vancouver, and obviously Joel has had a great career as a coach as well.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, I always have a warm spot in my heart, and I mean, I agree with you too. I mean, I got the 3 little boys now, and my wife, who's an American citizen, and anyone I talk to, I'm like, especially Canadians, like. Canadians need to go to that island, need to go to Newfoundland. It's the people, the way they speak, dialect, the culture, like everything about it. Like they're obviously, I mean, we're all Canadians, but it's just like you're in a different spot, and there's something special about it. And I want to go back in the summer too and see what George Street's like in the summer, and when the golf courses are open, all that great stuff. But anyways, I really, really do love the people there, and I appreciate everyone from there that's listening. And we got a pretty good fan base from there with the podcast. So
yeah, terrific place. And I know, I think, well, you might know the name, Greensleeves.
Oh yeah.
And we became real good friends with the owner at the time. But I heard it burnt down, and they built it back up. But we had a couple players. One in particular that was from Corner Brook, Newfoundland. Todd Gillingham also played there. So, he was certainly a fan favorite. And but like you said, the dialect and trying to understand them. Like, I didn't have a vehicle there. It wasn't a very big place, but it seemed like I had my own personal cab driver. His name was Patty, and probably for the first month, I had no idea what he was talking about. But I did get screeched in. I'm not sure if you did. So I do have that certificate of being screeched in at Greensleeves, and I'll never forget it.
Oh my gosh. Oh, you're making me smile. Like that's first of all, Todd Gillingham makes me smile because I played with him in St. John's too, in two different eras though. I think he must have been a couple of different places before that or in between. And then I played with him there with Bird Dog was there then, rest his soul. And yeah, we had a fun group there. And I did get screeched in as well. Which was funny about that is I didn't get screeched in there when I was with the team, but I did coming back on a road trip, and I was with the Bridgeport Sound Taggers. And oh my goodness, what a story that is. I don't know if I should tell it, but Dave Roach got traded that night, and I wasn't in the lineup. Roach, yeah, so Roachy got traded from the Rock. I wasn't in the lineup because I was hurt. So you can imagine me after playing there for 2 years, not in the game, right? And like just completely being like the ringleader for the team of like master of ceremonies, getting everyone set up with where they can go after. And we got Roachy home real late the one night, and he got screeched in. I got screeched in. Yesterday I was barbecuing with the hat that I had, like one of those old Nor'wester hats, right? Yeah. I still have it from that ceremony. So for any of you listeners that don't know what screeched in is, you should look it up. But there's some singing involved. There's a shot of screech involved, which is a liquor that's native out there, and you also have to kiss a dead fish. So
a cod, and you have to have the Newfie steak, a piece of bologna.
Yeah.
And if you get the song wrong, that's the kicker. If you get the song wrong, you got to do it all over again. And it's not an easy song to remember. So the guys in St. John's were nice enough to warn me about it. And they, trust me, I practiced. And I think it took me 2 times to get it, but pretty proud of that certificate that I have from Greensleeves.
Yeah, for sure. Greensleeves. Yeah, that's still there. I know that family real well. We were frequenters of Turkey Joe's. I mean, there were so many places there. I can't remember the name of the place we got screeched in at, but I might as well finish telling the rest of the story. I don't think Roach you would mind because it's pretty tame, but I think you'll get a chuckle of it. So will the listeners. So Roachy was like, he was leaving the next day. Like I said, he got traded. So the boys gave him the send off. It was after the game. I was the one that was kind of in charge of, I guess, getting him home, and he was having a real good old time. And as we all know, Roachy was a big boy. And he just got screeched in, and the song was Alabama was playing right before we were leaving the bar. This is like 2:30 probably in the morning, right? 3 in the morning, and
you're still a lineup, right? You're still a lineup outside.
The song was, if you're going to play in Texas, you got to have a fiddle in the band, right? So that's what was playing in the bar when we were leaving. And so on the way home, Roachy just keeps singing, "The fiddling ain't done." He's saying, he goes, "The fiddling ain't done, Podsy. The fiddling ain't done." So he's telling me this the whole way home, right? He's using the whole sidewalk to get back to the hotel. And then when we get to the hotel, I'm like, "Well, Roachy, what room are you in?" And he's like, 242. And so I'm like, "All right, you're sure it's 242? He's like, "Yeah, 242, Podsy. Fiddling ain't done. The fiddling ain't done." He's telling me, right? And in the elevator. And so we go, I get him to 242, knock on the door. Big hotel, right? I mean, this was the new rink now at this time, the one that's connected like with the walkway and the whole 9 yards. It's our head coach that answers the door. He's got it's Steve Sterling. I didn't even know he had fake teeth. He's got his teeth out. His white hair is like up to here. He's got his tidy whitey underwear on. I don't know who was more shocked, like him to see me or me to see him. Meanwhile, Roachy's like leaning on the hallway wall beside me, going, "Fiddling ain't done, Podsy. The fiddling."
Well, it's done now. Oh, that's funny.
Yeah. He had his numbers backwards. It was like 422 or something. Anyways, his roommate was Ray Schultz, and oh my God, that's one of the stories that I just crack up with every time I remember that one. But anyways, lots of good stories from Newfoundland. Let's talk about you a little bit with the Ducks. I mean, because that was their first ever year, correct? And that was your time in the show. I mean, you had some games with some other teams, like similar to me, but like you were a regular that year. You traveled with that team. You played 50 games. How did you end up there, and what was that experience like?
Again, I think Ottawa came in the previous year, so there had to be another expansion draft. And I'd played down in San Diego and had a decent, I guess, playoff. But it was, I don't know the whole story, Jason, but something had happened with the draft, and they only, obviously I was exposed to it. And there was only one other defenseman within the organization that was exposed. So I ended up getting picked up by Anaheim, and I'm thinking, okay, well, here we go again. But their minor league team was in San Diego, and I thought, well, I could be playing in the minors in worse places. And, fortunately for me, I ended up playing there for a year and a half in Anaheim. The second year, I believe, was a lockout year. And what a great organization. I mean, my God, they treated us fabulously, the families. And I think if you ask any of the players or the wives or girlfriends that were with their spouse, saying that could be one of the favorite places that they played, because at the time it was owned by Disney, and they just treated us like gold. So the second year was lockout year, went down to San Diego, came back up, and then ended up getting traded to Detroit. But great memories in Anaheim as well.
But was that, I mean, as far as being an NHLer, I mean, like, so you're around the minors, right? You're running that circuit. I mean, as I experienced that, I mean, the whole time you ended up getting to Anaheim there as a 27-year-old. You'd had some games in the NHL with Washington and with Buffalo, but the majority of your time was spent in the minor leagues, right? Yeah. So now you've made that jump, you've made that team, and you're doing the tour there. Like, did you feel at the time like it was a tour, or did you feel like, I can play here, and I'm establishing myself?
You're 27, and I've gone to probably, I don't know how many pro camps already, 12, 10, maybe. I'm not even quite sure, but it always seemed to be the same answer. You're in the training camp, you go see the GM and you go see the coach, and thanks very much, but we're going to send you down. And that was different. I remember going into Ron Wilson's office. He was a coach, and said, Mark, you know what? Why don't you go find a place? I'm like, really? So I'll never forget that as well. So again, a young team, and actually we had a pretty good group. I think we won 26 games that year, something like that. So other than a few obviously other expansion teams, that was, I think, second at the time. And again, it was just a real close knit team. We didn't have a lot of real NHLers per se. Stu Grimson was there. God rest his soul. Todd Ewing, who both of those are good friends of mine. Randy Ladouceur, Guy Hubert. Paul Career wasn't there yet. He was drafted the following year, and the rest of them were kind of in the same boat as I was, up and down in the minors. Gary Volk came from Vancouver, but again, we just went out and played, right? I mean, obviously, we had a ton of fun doing it, but at the same time, we just found ways to get some victories. So, again, playing that many years, 7 years, I believe, would have been in the minors, and then get an opportunity to be, playing in Anaheim for an expansion team in California was certainly a great time.
Right. Did anyone have an impact on you throughout your time, whether in the minors or in the NHL, as far as, an older guy that maybe took you under his wing, or kind of made you feel comfortable, made a difference for you in any scenario?
I remember my first training camp in Buffalo. Larry Playfair, of all people. We'd always go out for lunch. He'd always make sure that, I was kind of following along. And Larry was a good friend of my brother's who played. Larry played out in Langley for the Langley Lords, I believe, way back when. And he had spent some time at my parents' house at the time. So those older guys, so like Clark Gillies, would always make sure that they'd bring the young guys around. Lindy Ruff, not only there in Buffalo, but also played with them in San Diego. But, that's the one thing I think you'll concur, Jason, that those older players played for a long time, not because they were just great players. They were great people. And they knew what it meant, regardless of if you were a guy going up and down, you were in the organization, up and down from the minors to the NHL. But they made you feel like family. So I was fortunate. I had a ton of them, a lot of influential people as far as coaches as well. I mean, I always tried to pride myself on being a good teammate. I always try to get along with everybody, but sometimes that never happens either. But there were so many, and probably too many to mention.
Right. Well, I'm going to turn that. I mean, I think that's amazing what you just said there, and I'm going to turn that back at you, because I remember, and you probably don't, but when we played together in Long Beach, like Mark and I had a for those listening, Mark and I had whatever it was, 8 games I was there, and plus the playoffs, when I got traded from Toronto to LA. So I got traded for Yannick Perreault, was having a career year for myself personally, had like 42 in St. John's, and got traded in this deal. And LA had me start in the IHL. I found out later it was a contract thing. I had a one-way deletion clause at 40 games. So they ended up keeping me down until there was so few games left that I ended up with 39 games with the Kings. So anyways, that's another story, the business side of the game. But I show up there in Long Beach, and you, Mr. Ferner, Mark, was 12 years older than me, and just made me feel comfortable. Like, you were just one of those guys that like would invite me out for lunch, or if we were on the road, like, take me to dinner, and that's memorable. I mean, those things are memorable, and that makes a difference for anyone, let alone a young guy coming into a new organization where I knew nobody there, right? Like, I knew I didn't know that league, because the IHL was a different league. I was familiar with the AHL. I didn't know the West Coast teams. So little, in fact, Fernsey, I don't know if you probably even knew this or would remember it at the time, but I got traded, did the flight, like the St. John's flight to Long Beach, which, I mean, that flight doesn't exist, obviously, but it's a hell of a long way to go. I don't know if you can go any farther in North America. I thought that I wasn't playing that night. I got miscommunicated with the management or whatever, and I thought I was playing in 2 days. Anyways, didn't have the best sleep the night before, let's say that. Had that 8-hour, 9-hour flight day, show up at the rink, and my jersey's hanging in the stall. Right. So my jersey's in the stall, Boxy's there. He's like, "You ready to go?" And I'm just like, "Are you kidding me? I've had pretzels and peanuts, in the last 10 hours, So anyway, so I go home back to the hotel to try and get a nap and a bite to eat. I come back to the rink. I'm so unfamiliar with the league and the rink. I walk into the other team's dressing room. I'm shaking guys' hands, introducing myself.
Really?
Jason Padol.
Well, because you'd have to go right by our room then. You went to, right? Yeah.
Well, I don't know which door I came in. I think I don't. All I remember is that I got about 15 feet into this room and introduced myself to like 6 guys, and they said, "Hey, kid, I think you're in the wrong room." So I turn around and leave. And anyways, one of my funny pro stories. But yeah, get back to the whole idea though. Is like, I was uncomfortable. You're uncomfortable. You don't know anybody. You don't know the league. You don't know anyone. And it took someone like you to step up and go to your way, shake a guy's hand. What are you doing after? That type of stuff makes a big difference. And not everybody does it, but the guys that do it are memorable, and they definitely can make a difference.
Well, I think that was, and I looked it up, I think, Jason, 98, 99. And we had a good group there. Like Danny Lambert was there, Patty Augusta was there. Mark Hardy would have been the assistant coach. John Van Boxmeer was the head coach. And again, I've learned so much from Boxy. I really did. I played 16 years and I played eight years for him. Wow. If you can play 8 years for Boxy, then that was kind of a love-hate relationship. But he really emphasized culture and being a good teammate, and that's all it is, right? I've been on the other side of it too, where you walk in the room and for the most part, everyone was pretty friendly, and the closer you can come together as a team, the better you're going to be off. So it's tough to get traded, and if you have family and whatnot, but if you walk in the room and they can make you feel comfortable as soon as possible, then you're way ahead of the curve. So that was something that, not only myself, but I'm sure there's some other guys that certainly wanted to make sure that you felt comfortable, because you're only there for 8 games, right? I think, 8
games.
Too.
And we did have that little playoff. We got knocked out, I think, in the first round by Houston that year in 6 or something like that. And anyways, But it was, I mean, I definitely enjoyed my time there, and the guys and the area. I mean, that whole area was nice. Did you, I mean, you played a little bit after that, but not much. I mean, that was definitely the tail of your playing career. And then you got involved in coaching. Was that something that you took with you as far as like trying to impart that thing with your leadership group and the older guys of like how your expectation was for how they should be acting?
100%. I mean, obviously, I was winding down. I spent a couple stints over in Germany, but always knew I wanted to get in coaching. So Voxy, again, being the man he is, he brought me back for one more year as a player coach. So I got to sit behind closed doors now with one of the smarter players that I believe is in the game, and John Van Boxmeer. And it was always about the culture, and certainly you need good leadership. We, as a coach, you just try to steer the ship, right? Making sure that you keep it out of the ditch. You have to have good leaders, and let them have some freedom. And even when I started coaching as a head coach, more so in probably Vernon, I would stay out of the room as much as possible. That was their room. That was their sanctuary. They didn't need me coming in there every single day. They didn't need me talking, but certainly if I needed to go in there and peel the paint off the walls, I would too. But that was kind of my introduction to coaching, was in Long Beach, and then career was over, and I actually cut my teeth in the Western League as an assistant coach with the Vancouver Giants. So their inaugural year.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, because I didn't see that actually when I was researching. I saw that you're with the Blazers again there, and stepped in with Micker. So you actually had an experience in the league prior to that.
Yeah, I was in Vancouver for 1 year, and then Milan Dragasega was the coach, and Dean Evison, who's now intern at Minnesota, and Craig Bonner were coaching in Kamloops. I think they were there for 3 or 4 years, and Scott Bonner was the GM in Vancouver. Both Dean and Craig were let go, and it was just a natural fit to go to Kamloops. I think Troy came in as the head coach and ended up being an assistant there with him, and then he stepped down for health reasons and took the team over. So I was there for 3 or 4 years, and then had an opportunity to become my own head coach, and come to Vernon for 4 years. Then went back to Everett, then came back, back to Kamloops, for another year. And then the job in Vernon came available. So I came here for I think another 5 years.
Yeah, well, you're fast forwarding through a lot of that stuff. I'd love to get into that whole aspect though of like, so you knew, I mean, and you've touched on that, getting out of your career, that this was something that you wanted, your playing career, this was something that you wanted to do, so you had that experience as the player, assistant coach, and then you got involved, stepped right in with the Giants. What was the learning curve like for you being behind the bench and as an assistant? What were you soaking up there, and what were you learning before you had your first chance at a head job?
Again, it was a tough year in Vancouver. Obviously, an expansion year. We didn't have a lot of success. So I think you learn a lot from winning, and you learn a lot from losing too. So, the one thing that I wanted to always, and I told my wife this, that if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it my way. And I don't think there's anything wrong with being a player's coach. I think you have to be, especially nowadays, you have to be very open to change. It wasn't a dictatorship. We'd have our systems in place. Like I said, I was fortunate that I played for some very, very, very good coaches, and I always seemed to be a pack rat with it. So it's not about the X's and O's. I really don't think it is. I mean, I don't think that's how one coach gets an advantage over another coach. I think how one coach gets an advantage over another coach is how they treat their players. If your players will play for you, you'll hopefully have some success. I mean, and sometimes the best team doesn't win, right? Like there's lots that goes into it. So, especially in junior hockey, when you're coaching kids, the biggest thing is it has to be a safe place. Their parents are trusting you that you're going to look after their kid. So that's one thing that I always try to do is make it a very safe place, make it a fun place, know the difference between work and fun, and making sure that when it was time to work, we'd go to work, and we wouldn't leave work till work was done. And it seemed to work, especially at the junior A level, for sure. Western League's a little bit different. I mean, there's a lot of intangibles that go into that league too. You have a draft, where in Junior A you're just recruiting. But both great leagues for sure. I mean, obviously it's a path of one's probably a quicker path to pro in the Western League, and Junior A is more NCAA routed.
Right. Yeah, no, there's a lot there I want to unpack. One of which is you talking about being a player's coach and having a safe place. I think that was, something that I've touched on before that wasn't necessarily the culture, maybe when you started. And I think when my career started going, that the player was viewed, in my opinion, as more of an asset or a commodity. And some of these guys were just on the cusp of coming in and actually treating the player like a person, and I think, when I've talked with you in the past, it seems that was and has been a focus for you is, what are these young men like, not young hockey players, what are these young men like, and what makes these players tick as people? Is that something that you were trying to focus on, like, consciously?
100%. And I guess there's two sayings, are you a motivator or can you inspire kids? And I think there's a difference there. I think motivation, you can motivate players, and depends on how you do it, but it could be a short-term fix. You can motivate by fear, you can motivate by, give them a carrot. But if you can inspire them, I think that lasts a lot longer. It takes a lot longer, but culture for me is everything, so it was real important. And maybe didn't have as much control over it in the Western League because there's a draft, but in Junior A, like, I made sure that we brought good people in. Because the game is still a game and it should be fun. Because the parity between the players is real close. I certainly try to bring in certain types of players and I would always say to our kids that let's try to build a team that you want to go into a seventh game with, as far as playoffs are concerned. And we in junior hockey in Vernon, I don't think we lost the seventh game. So we had a great time doing it too. So having the ability to inspire kids is for me, I think, more important than trying to motivate them.
Yeah, that's really cool to say that, inspiration versus motivation. To me, when I hear the word inspiration, like, I almost think, role model, mentor kind of example sort of scenario, right? Because you're giving them something to seek, something to look for. I mean, is that the way you think of it when you say inspire, or how did you plant that seed?
Well, I think if you're inspired to do something, I think it lasts longer. Like, you could go to a kid and if you don't do this, we're going to do that. So that's a form of motivation, I think. To inspire, I just feel like it lasts longer, and there's a saying that you can, reputation or character. Reputation is what people perceive you as an organization, so-and-so organization, they have a good reputation. Well, those are the people that are on the outside looking in. They really don't know what's going on behind closed doors, So again, we've talked about that a lot within our groups, but character is who you are. That's at the end of the day is how you're going to play and how you're going to represent yourself, how you're going to represent your family's name. I would give our guys heck all the time. Make sure your shoes are shined and your shirt's tucked in, you got a belt and your tie's done up and you look proper. You hold the door open for people, and you have a responsibility to represent yourself, the organization, and your family the right way.
Yeah, no, 100%. I love that you use that too, because I actually use that with the players that I work with, is because you can get caught up in the reputation aspect, and some people, I mean, being able to define what that is, you can't necessarily control it. You can do a lot of right things, and not control what the reputation is, but you can control your character and how you show up on a day-to-day basis. And that's something you're in control of. So when we can focus on what we can control as players and as humans, usually we get a lot of better results along the way too. So I like that you bring that up. How did as a head coach now, you were a head coach in Kamloops, then you jumped into to the BCHL with like ridiculous success, like that Did you have a year? Was your first year the year that you guys went and won it, or was that your second year?
That would have been the second year.
Second year.
I think Mark Hollick was the coach, and he had gone. He took the Kootenay job, the Cranbrook, in the Western Hockey League, and I was actually in Kamloops. I had started a small little business, and Troy Mick had called me and asked if I'd have any interest in being a coach GM in Vernon. At the time, I didn't really, you get fired for the first time, and it's always a tough thing, right? And that's where Ken Hitchcock comes in and basically tells me that you don't really become a coach until you get fired, and that's why Hitch is such a great coach, because he's been fired a few times. But it was a tough pill to swallow. Then I had an opportunity to meet with Dr. Duncan Ray, who was the owner at the time, and my wife and I went out for dinner with him or lunch, drove to Vernon, and on the way home I just said, there's a man I could work for, because all his beliefs and all his what he felt was important as far as values were concerned, so did I. So came in, and we ended up losing to Penticton in 7 games that first year. Which a crazy series that we had. The year previous, sorry, I should just rewind here a little bit. The Vernon had gone to the league final against Nanaimo and lost. So knowing that, we had a good chunk coming back, and we might have a pretty good hockey team, but it wasn't to be that year. And then we made a couple adjustments and had some good young kids come in, and then started having some success after that.
Right. Yeah. Would you want to? Well, first of all, we should acknowledge that Duncan's no longer with us, and he was an icon in this community for a long time, and just really did some great things with the team, and everyone that worked for him and everyone that he touched seemed to really be impacted by him. So he had a heart attack and is no longer with us. But I thought we should recognize that, because he was a real good hockey man.
100%. I mean, he had owned the team for 20 years, I think, or maybe more. And the ironic thing about that was we had the old Civic, where Civic Arena here in Vernon was torn down, and we had an opportunity to play Prince George in one last game, and it was a throwback game. So we had throwback jerseys, and I wore a fedora on the bench. But that was Duncan had bought the team, and that's where they started. That was the last game that Duncan saw his hockey team play, and I think 2 days later he had passed away on January, close to our deadline. But he was just a big happy man that would give everything. He loved this town in Vernon. He loved the hockey team. I haven't heard one player, one person ever say one bad thing about the man, and certainly he'll be sorely lost. And obviously his wife ended up selling the hockey team. But just a great human being, great family.
Yeah, and I heard he was good to he allowed you to do your job too, and some people don't, right? Like he understood, like you said, you guys had shared philosophies, but he allowed you to do what you do, what you hired for, and that is a really, I think that starts the culture too, right, of the team. Like that trust from that scenario goes to you, which now goes to the players, and I think that that not enough gets talked about that, but I do think that's relevant in the success of an organization.
He cared. That's what he did. And that was kind of his philosophy, just hire the right people and let them do their job. I mean, and trust me, I wouldn't do anything without his okay. We talked a lot. God, he was on every road trip. Like he just loved being around the group. He was in the dressing room, and he loved going to Boston Pizza. Our players loved him. He would mingle in the crowd. Everybody knew who he was. And you don't get too many owners like that. He won, 5, 6 championships, and that's not by fluke. But he didn't get his fingers in there. He just let people do their job. And like you said, that doesn't happen very often.
Yeah. So let's talk about those. You mentioned earlier, you went to 3 national championships in a row, which is ridiculous. Won 2 of them, the first 2. And then the third one, I remember being a fan and watching it on TV. And I think, not that I just think, you should have. That's the shoulda, coulda, woulda. But in a 1-game finale, you guys dominated that game and ended up losing. I think it was 2-0 with an empty netter or something. But this close to winning 3 in a row. Just walk us through that time, because that just must have been an amazing time to be coach and to be around that team.
You know what, it was, and a lot of the praise needs to go to, you know, the ex head scout too, Larry Black. He was very influential of getting those right type of players. And I remember my first year, couple stories here for you, Jason. You know, Larry had been the head scout here for a long time. They had, you know, Troy Mick and Mark Hollick and I think Mike Van de Kamp at the time. So obviously a new coach coming in now. And we went out for lunch, and Duncan, myself, and Larry. But Duncan had come up to me and said, you know, Larry's a little bit worried here, because he's not sure if you're going to like the same type of players that he likes. So I grabbed Larry and I said, Larry, I heard there might be some concerns that we're not going to like the same type of players. I don't understand what you're talking about. He goes, well, gee, Mark, I just, you know, maybe you don't like the same type of players. I said, I'm going to make it real simple here, Larry. As long as you find good players, I'll like them. So just don't go find bad players. But he, you know, there's always been that discussion, who brought in the two Jones boys, Connor and Kellen Jones. Was it Duncan? Was it Larry? Was it Troy? But again, going back to the culture, you know, we had tremendous leadership. Chris Crowell was our captain, and he was a no-nonsense guy. I mean, he was our captain for 2 years, and we had Hunter Bishop, who came back, and things just started to roll. Like we did some different things. It was more about our compete and our work ethic than anything else. And they seemed to thrive under that. And then obviously the next year we had another real good group, and we built that team a little bit differently the next year, just because, you know, we had great series against Penticton, and they tried to get bigger. And then we went with more speed and skill and had an opportunity, and we won again in Dauphin, in Manitoba. And I'll be quite honest with you, Jason, that we had won back-to-back, and we felt we need to restock the cupboards a little bit, even though we had a good core coming back. We had good culture, and I just wanted those new players to get a taste of that. Because if you empty the cupboards too much, then you lose your culture, and you can lose your culture in a hurry, and it takes a long time to get it back. But, you know, we brought some other players in, brought some younger players in, and we didn't let our foot off the gas. I mean, in my opinion, I didn't expect us to get there, but they did, and that's what winning does. And yeah, we ended up going to Camrose, I believe it was Camrose, and lost to Pembroke. Sheldon Keefe was the coach there, who's now a coach in Toronto, and I think shots on net were 41-20 in our favor. And, you know, they got a lucky break on a block shot, scored on a breakaway, and then got an empty netter. It's so ironic that you could talk to me or ask the question about the two games that two World Bank Cups that we won. I probably couldn't tell you, but I can tell you pretty much every play in that game that we lost. So that's kind of the difference, you know. Just it stings a little bit, but at the same time, very proud of the organization. It was my privilege to coach here in Vernon. And we had terrific kids. We had great kids. We have great culture, and we got, you know, we had great ownership and great surrounding staff.
That's awesome. Yeah, you talk about the head scout there, and you talk about the difference between being involved in the WHL and the BCHL, and just from the difference of the level of recruiting. And you did own that GM hat there while you were in Vernon. You know, you said bring me good players, but I know that you're saying that a little bit tongue in cheek, but the idea is that it does matter what type of player you bring in, because I know you're a guy that cares about intangibles a lot, and I know that you keep talking about the culture in the room, and you know, when that to me is not how well you stick handle, and that's not how well you skate. That's the type of you know, character that you're bringing in with you as a person. Like, how did you go about that recruiting process, and what type of players were you looking for when it came to those intangibles?
Oh, it's a good question, and certainly all my philosophies aren't my philosophies. They come from coaches that I played with, and, you know, we'd have long talks with our coaching staff and our scouting staff, and I would do the majority of the scouting out in the States, and Larry would do BC, and we just had other people that agencies and agents would help a lot. As long as, you're running a good program, they'll send you the players. So how I kind of went about it was, and it was real simple, Jason. We'd have a box, like a quadrant, right? In that first quadrant, we'd have skill and character. That's what was in the box. And then the next box would be skill with no character. Next box would be no skill and character. And then the next box would be no skill, no character. Well, the no skill, no character, we didn't worry about. Okay. We wanted to try to get as many people in our organization, in our dressing room, that had skill and character. And then you have two more boxes. You got skill and no character. Well, we would trade those guys because everybody wants skill. And then we would try to, we wouldn't trade the no skill and character. And our teams were, I like to hope and think that we were hard to play against. You still need the speed, you still need the skill. And we would just try to get as many people in that skill and character box that we could. And, for 4 years, we had a lot of players in those boxes. And I never liked trading players. You make a commitment to a kid, and you make a commitment to a family. But unfortunately, that's sometimes part of the deal. And the one thing I never did try to do, and I think I did a pretty good job of it, they committed themselves to the BC Hockey League. I've never traded too many people outside the BC Hockey League unless, they were going back home to Saskatchewan or Ontario or something like that. So, there was a lot of respect from the coaches and the players, and our assistants were great. Kevin Peterson was here for a handful of years, and Jason Williamson and Eric Goddard and Jarrett Smithson, and we had fun doing it. We really did. We had a good group, and it's a lot easier when you're winning as well.
Sure. No, 100%. What, when you say character, and that's one of the things that I've talked about before, sometimes on the podcast, sometimes from stage, but character to me, it means something to you when you say it, right? It's one of those words, and it means something to me when I say it, but sometimes it can mean different things to different people because it's such a big box, right? Character. There's so many things that you can stuff in there. Like when you say that word, you're looking for character plus skill. Like what initially pops out for you as part of being an intangible within character?
And a lot of it has to do off the ice, how you treat people. How you represent yourself. And we had tremendous amount of character. I had the privilege of coaching one player here in Vernon, local kid, Jagger Williamson. And he had as much character as any player that I ever coached. To a point where, and you know how kids are, Jason. You'd go in the dressing room and they'd throw their tape, and I wouldn't say anything. It wouldn't go in the garbage can, but I'd go over and pick it up. And I wouldn't yell at them and scream at them. That to a point where I hope at the end of the year or halfway through the year that they would identify that. And sure enough, guys like Jagger, someone would throw a roll of tape, and he would be the one playing 5 years in the league, and he'd be the one going to pick it up. So character is who you are as a person, and I think it goes well beyond what you do on the ice. I think it's how you treat people. Even when things aren't going your way, it's easy to be that good guy when you're having success, but it shouldn't change you who you are. And so he was one of the more, I'm not going to say better character, but he had a tremendous amount of character. Not that we didn't have it throughout our dressing room, but at the end of the day, it was just who you are as a person. And I think who you are as a person ends up translating to how you play on the ice. Right. And, that was the biggest thing for me. So we kind of stayed away from certain types of players, and it wasn't so much, he had a tremendous amount of numbers, but if you're not going to be a good teammate, it's not going to go. It's not going to work. And I think Barry Trotz had the best quote. If you want to go somewhere fast, go by yourself. If you want to go someplace far, go with a team.
Right.
So.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I like how you touch on that too, because those people qualities, like, this idea of I don't know, like what else could you put in there? You can put in, leadership, you can put in resiliency, you can put in your dedication and commitment. And I think a lot of those things deserve check marks in the character box, right? If you have guys that are willing to do those types of things and are maybe a little more skilled in the dedication and commitment department and the teammate department, I mean, yes, that translates on the ice, right? Because like all those things that are happening in the dressing room or in the weight room or away from the rink, you mean that's something that you just can't have an on-off switch, I've found, right? And the guys that don't have the on-off switch, like they do things a certain way, and when you put a group of guys or men and women together in a scenario that do things the same way and follow the same principles, now you're talking about something special.
Well, it habits, right? And that's the one great thing about team sports, and especially at a younger age, because you got a lot of different personalities, 100%, right? They're coming from different backgrounds, and that's what was great about Junior A. Like, it's just not restricted to Canada or BC or the West. I mean, you're getting kids from Ontario, you're getting kids from Quebec. We seem to have a tremendous amount of success getting the right ones from the States too. But peer pressure comes into play, and that's where the culture too. So your culture has to be right. The one thing that I would always say to our group that, the quicker we can come together as a team, the further we're going to go. So there was no veteran, there was no rookie stuff. They'd have their little fun with it and whatnot, but at the same time, when you put all that stuff aside, because you're not going to win, like you're going to need your 16, 17-year-olds to win. And I always said to our older players that you guys are going to lead the way. This is going to be your hockey team. I'm just going to steer the ship. You guys are going to, put all the work in, but I'll work just as hard as you guys do, but make sure that these kids are heading in the right direction, because they're going to, at some point, be the leaders of the hockey team. And if you learn from the right types of leaders, then it makes it a lot easier, because it becomes a habit, and that's just your culture. And if your culture is right, it's going to give you a good chance to win.
No, 100%. A couple of questions are from the coaching aspect. One, you mean having team success usually leads to individual success, and I didn't do the research on those teams, like how many teams from your championship squads that went on to NCAA scholarships, but sometimes that's a hard thing to get through, especially at the teenage level. I mean, even at the pro level, but especially the teenage level, where you're not getting the minutes you want, right? You want to have this personal path, like you want to get somewhere, whether it's the NHL or get drafted or get your NCAA scholarship, and you feel like you're not getting noticed. How did you go about letting guys believe in the fact that, hey, you play your role here, you come together and play for each other, and if we have success together, you will have success on your own?
That might have started the first year, and we had Hunter Bishop, who is a terrific hockey player. I think he just finished playing some pro hockey, played over in Europe, played in the East Coast League, maybe had a little bit of a stint in the American Hockey League as well. But we're going into Game 7 against Penticton our first year. And we had probably half the group had scholarships, and they knew where they were going after that, right? They just did. But we also had some older players that didn't have scholarships. So that was kind of the message that I'd sent to them, and I would always warn our players. That's the one thing I would do. I would never throw a question at them, especially if it was going to be a tough question. I would always, tee it up for them. I go, hey, listen, Hunter, this is when I'm going to come in. I'm going to say this, okay, just so you're not shocked at it. So I came in and I said, Hunter, where are you going next year? Good. Well, I'm going to, where is he going? Notre Dame, possibly. I apologize. I can't remember. That's, 15 years ago.
Yeah.
And I went to Bryce, not Bryce Kokoski, his brother, older brother. I said, well, defenseman, 20-year-old. I said, where are you going next year? He goes, nowhere. And basically I left the room. And because it was always about, for me, it was always about, if we can play harder for the player next to you than you do for yourself, that's when you become a team. So it was always, and we've had those players. I mean, I remember Ryan Santana, he bounced around in the USHL, he bounced around in the NA, and a California kid, and a good friend of mine said, you got to give him a chance. So he was 20 years old. He didn't get his scholarship to Boston University till the Royal Bank Cup in Victoria. And he was shocked. He was like, I said, Chance, BU wants to talk to you. I go, BU? Who's BU? I don't know a BU. I said, Boston University. He ends up getting a scholarship last 2 days of junior A hockey. So you never know, right? You just keep going and control what you can control. That's what we'd always try to do, and be a good teammate. Work hard for your teammates, because the one thing, if you don't, your teammates will be the first ones to identify when you stop working and stop competing. Yeah. Not the coaches, not your teammates. So that was something that I always tried to reiterate to the players, that it's not about me. It's not about the coaching staff. It's not about anybody else except your teammates.
Yeah. No, that's great. That's great stuff. What about, there's I don't know. I mean, not that there's a debate, but I mean, you've stepped out of the coach, and you were scouting this year. When you look at the WHL and your time with that in the coaching capacity, and then scouting it, like, how do you feel those leagues compare? Like, is a good team in the BCJHL, would they be able to compete in the WHL?
Good question. I mean, they're different routed kids, right? I mean, a good team, yeah, they could, but at the same time, there's a lot of teams that go through that flux in the Western League where it's a rebuild. Where I don't think in Junior A there's a rebuild, because there's no draft. It's just recruit. So there's a lot of work on both sides. There is some parities, no question about it. I think the goaltending possibly could be better in the Western League. You got your top 2 or 3 defensemen, your top 3 or 4 players, and then after that, it starts to even itself out. I mean, you look at my last year in Vernon. I mean, we had 7 players on our hockey team that ended up going back to the Western Hockey League. So, and I'll just be quite honest with you, Jason. Some of them really struggled here in Vernon. They just the difference from that, from my perspective, is I would never give our players roles, right? I just wouldn't. Where maybe at the Western Hockey League, because there's a difference in talent level, where you got your power play guys, you got your penalty killing guys, you got these types of players. I expected our players to all play the same. I expect you to play good defense. I expect you to block shots. I expect you to finish checks, and I expect you to score. I just thought at the junior A level, you're pigeonholing a 16 to a 20-year-old kid that you're never good enough. You're not a power play guy. You're not a penalty killing guy. So I expected them all to contribute in some way, and that's at that. Then you got a team that just got wave after wave after wave of the exact same thing. So,
right,
I would have to say that the Western Hockey League is better, but these kids could play in the Western Hockey League. They're just routed differently, right? Yeah. There's some kids that should go to the Western League, and there's some kids that should go to school.
Mm-hmm. Do you have an opinion on that? I mean, and why I kind of asked that question in the first place. I mean, I played in both leagues, and I know that it's actually changed now, that there's a lot more guys becoming pro from that college system, right? It's not an either or anymore. It kind of was a little bit for a while. There was less guys coming out of the college route in the junior A rank that would sign pro contracts set up in the NHL, and that's not the case anymore. So that's good, but from a scouting perspective now, like to watch a BCJHL game, right, and a kid that's a performer or a good skater or whatever, there, like you do need to be able to take him out of that mentally, at least I would assume you would, and put him in that WHL environment or even a pro environment. And how does he measure up in that scenario?
And that's the toughest thing, right? Because you're almost comparing apples to oranges.
Yeah.
Right. You're still playing the same game, but I think obviously the talent pool is deeper in the CHL, and from a pro perspective, I mean, I only got my toe in the water for 1 year with Buffalo, but it's all about projection too, right? So where's he going to be in 3 years from now? Where's he going to be in 5 years from now? And that's why you'll see a lot more junior A players possibly getting drafted too, because there's longer period because they're at school, might not have to sign that contract. And that was the learning curve for me too, that Nothing really changed as far as the scouting or my philosophy. I think it was very similar to what, I'd like to think Buffalo was thinking, and possibly a lot of other teams in the NHL are thinking too. But the biggest thing is projecting where these kids are going to be here in 3 years from now. Are they going to grow? Are they going to get quicker? Is their skating going to improve? So where, as you know as well too, that analytics has really, really come into a lot of the decision making. But there's so many intangibles that you can't analyze that don't really make sense. So you look at Kel McCarr. I mean, came out of Brooks, the AJHL. One of the best, if not the best, young talent that's in the National Hockey League right now. And Brooks got another good young player next year as far as that draft is concerned. So there's talent everywhere. It just depends on what you're looking for.
Sure. I have a good question from the group here. Just a reminder that we are live in the Facebook group. So if anyone out there listening on the podcast later, you can definitely join the Facebook group. It's called Up My Hockey Parent Group. And there's somebody that was working with you and Vernon here, didn't identify themselves, but they said, please ask him what he finds the biggest difference when scouting to recruit versus scouting to draft or sign as a free agent. Does your approach change?
Probably a little bit. I mean, when you're recruiting for your junior team per se, you might only have them for 1 year, right? So size doesn't necessarily matter. I mean, we had some smaller players here in Vernon that were tremendous. The two Jones boys. I mean, 5'10", 5'9". Liam Finley, 5'7". Tough toe Connor Jagger Williamson. So when you're recruiting for junior, size isn't as big of a factor per se as when you're recruiting for pro. What are they going to be in 5 years from now? Like, are they going to play? And as you know, Jason, I mean, you played a long time. It's hard. It's hard to play in the National Hockey League. There's some core components that I'm sure every team has, and what you're identifying, is skating, the character, the compete, the hockey sense. There's so many things that go into it. Does he have coachability? How driven is this kid? Will he do things that help you win in the playoffs? So it was a change for sure. I mean, it was different, but at the same time, I mean, it was still the same philosophy. Like in junior A hockey, you might be able to have a one and done, but that doesn't help your culture, right? Your culture better be in order, and that's where, you look at the Buffalo Sabres per se, or you look at the Boston Bruins, or you look at St. Louis or Pittsburgh. Probably those upper teams for sure. The Boston Bruins. I mean, what a tremendous culture they have. The St. Louis Blues. I mean, they got that winning mentality. So. You can win in junior A hockey. You just got to recruit properly and bring the right types of kids in.
And I guess you say, like, I mean, the biggest thing is the timeline, I guess, listening to what you're saying there. I mean, when you're recruiting, what you see is what you get, because you're recruiting for that next season. You mean, that player, you've seen what that player is, you know what he's going to expect from him in the fall. Whereas in a scouting capacity, you're trying to project an 18-year-old, 17-year-old kid as what he's going to be at 23, as a pro. And there's a big departure there. Yeah.
And there's so much due diligence that go into it. And you no different than you would do in junior A, but it's just a deeper dive, right? It's just, you're talking to Billet, you're talking to parents, you're talking to ex-players, ex-coaches, teachers. Is he going to grow? Is he going to put weight on? Analytically, there's so much computer stuff that you can watch, like Sport Logic. We did a lot of video coaching as well, which I really enjoyed. Maybe some of the scouts with Buffalo didn't, because they weren't a video-oriented group, but that's all I did for 16 years as far as a coach, was watch video, and sometimes that's all you can do. So, it's not the same as watching live, which you have to do, but, where you might be able to put up with a kid for 6 months, but at the same time, is he going to be a pro? And some of these kids just want that opportunity to go to school too, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. Using hockey to get an education is great.
You don't have to have bigger aspirations. I mean, that's a big goal. I
No,
mean, it's hard to do too, right? I mean, that's a
100%.
great vehicle. You mentioned the word coachability, and that was another question that came in from the group, requesting that we speak about it a little bit and how important it is, and even maybe what that means. Like, if you're a young athlete, and there's a lot of young athletes that listen to this podcast, Mark, that are trying to find their way, and they hear the word coachable. What is that? Is that an intangible that is relevant and important to them? And if so, what does that mean?
That's a good question. It's always a tough thing, right? But I think it all falls back onto character too, right? Like, are you prepared for change? Like I would never be a coach that would guilt guys into it. I'd never screamed. I never yelled. And I think it was more about trust. So the players need to coach. The players need to trust their coach, and their coach needs to trust their players. And once that boundaries down, or that wall's down, I think they start to believe a little bit more. And I think, but as you know too, this is a why generation. The kids need to know why, not how we're going to do it, but why are we doing it? And I think as a coach, I think that's something that you need to take the time to let them know, this is why we're going to do it, because we're going to have success this way. So, you got to be a good listener too. Like, I would get so mad at our kids sometimes, Jason, that I don't care if you screw up a drill or whatnot. That's going to happen, because I was one of those guys too when I played, that you'd screw drills up. And that's probably one of the best pieces of advice I got as a coach is, if the drills aren't going well, the best thing you do is get in it, and then you'll find out why it's not going well. But the one skill that I always asked our kids to have is a listening skill. And that is a skill. And I think that's all about coachability. But as a coach, you need to take the time to make sure that your players know, or the best way for your players to learn. Physically, they got to walk through it. Verbally, you can tell them, or physically or visually, they have to see it. So we'd always try to teach in all three ways, because that's the last thing the kids want to do is put up your hand and say, I don't understand what we're doing here. And right. If need be, you got to take them aside. So, the biggest thing is to make sure that they trust you and they know why they're doing it, but also understand that they might not understand what the heck you're talking about. So take the time to teach, right? You have to.
I think that's important. I mean, super relevant for all the parents and coaches out there listening. Like, you need to have established that trust. And once that trust is established, now they believe you are pushing them forward and to develop, right, and to be the best player they can be. So now they become coachable. Okay, I trust this guy. I'm going to listen to what he has to say, right? Like that, to get the most out of your players. For sure, that level of trust has to be there. But what happens? And it's tough to have a solid answer to this, but what happens for the players? And there are players out there that don't think that their coaches, they don't trust their coaches. They don't think their coach has their best interest at heart yet, but you're still in the sport and you still want to progress and you still want to be seen or identified. Like, how do you become coachable in that environment? Would you have any suggestions for that?
Yeah. And again, it's tough, because as a parent or as a player, all you worry about is one person. Right? Yourself. As a coach, you got to worry about 20. So what I would do sometimes, Jason, is I would let our players come up with some systems. Because it's not about the X's and O's. And you can forecheck a lot of different ways, as you know, in the, forecheck 1-2-2, 2-1-2, whatever. You can 1-2-2 in neutral zone, 1-1-3, whatever. That's not, you can shrink in your own end. You can play standard D zone. So it was never about the X's and O's. But what would happen is, once you get them involved, once they have a voice, now there's accountability. So it's not, because what happens sometimes is, well, gee, if we played this system, I'd be a better player. We'd be a better team. So sometimes it's okay to let your players have some input, because then if they have input, now you have accountability, because then you can go to them and say, listen, you know what? You guys picked this system, not me. You want to play this way? Well, then it's everything is still surrounded around hard work,
Yeah.
and accountability. And I get it. Coachability, and well, he's a coach isn't playing me properly. I'm not playing in the right situations. Why should I listen to him? Like doesn't have my best interest in hand. Well, it's not about any one individuals. It's about the team. There's not one person that should be bigger than the team. And I think if that message can get sent by a coach that this is about the group, and if the group has success, then you'll have success. And if you have any issues, come talk to me. And it's okay for a coach to change too, right?
Right.
And that kind of goes back to it's okay to be a player's coach. I like my coach. I want to work hard for him.
Yeah.
I'm not playing with the right guys. Well, then put him somewhere else.
Right.
Maybe the two guys that don't want to play with you either, right?
Yeah.
It's not about you. So you can do lots of different things, and just to gain the players' trust. That's the biggest thing. Trust is huge. Trust is a huge word in sports.
Yeah. Yeah, and and I'm glad it is now, right? Because it wasn't that way before, and I think it is that way now. I love the accountability thing you talk about too, is because when the athlete, even with what I do, not discounting what I do, but when I work with guys one-on-one or in a group environment, the first thing that I want to establish is what it is that they want. Right? It's not what I want, or it's not what the parents want. It has to be what they want. And once they establish what they want, and there's a clear idea of what that is, what the end game is, now there's a plan that we develop together that they become accountable to, right? Because this isn't for me, it's for you. So now the ownership on the execution is on them. And when we talk about a team, like you're saying, head coach of a hockey team, when we keep that that goal in mind, that they form that goal, and now they're forming the plan. They have to become accountable. And when you get that buy-in, that's really, really cool. I love that you talk about doing that, because sometimes some guys, it's a top-down thing all the time, right? Well, this is the way. This is the way. This is the way. And I just don't find that as being a successful model, especially in today with today's athletes, right? The why athlete.
You're just steering the ship, right? I mean, they're the ones putting the work in. And that's something that I would always say to our kids, that I'll never yell and scream. I'll never embarrass you. I'll never throw you in under the bus in the paper, but what gets said behind closed doors. But if we do have success, you'll be the ones getting it. So they knew that I would protect them to a point. But getting back to your point of finding what they really want. And if you ask the right questions, and this is what I always do, Jason. I would always, whatever they'd finish with, I don't like who I'm playing with. Well, what do you mean who you're playing with? You start peeling that onion back, and you'll really get to the root of the problem. And it might be something completely different. Yeah. Right? Like but they're kids too. Their brains don't develop till, they're 23, and that's just proven. So you don't know what's going on in their life, if they got a girlfriend or school or family. So you gotta care for them. They gotta know that you do care for them, and it's still just a game. Yeah,
no, for sure. I'll finish with one question here that I think is interesting. I've definitely beat the drum on the intangible side a lot with my audience, as far as we spend so much time as parents and athletes on the power skating and the time on ice and the skills coaches and this type of aspect. But we don't necessarily consciously think about the intangibles of character and of leadership and of communication and of emotional management and these types of things, where, in my personal opinion, I think these are massive drivers to the skill component of a hockey player. Right? If you have these things as a solid foundation as a person, that you're going to be a better hockey player at the end of the day. And guess what? And if hockey doesn't work out, you're going to be a better human. So, I mean, it's a win-win scenario. Like if I take a step away from that now and ask you as a scout, like when we're talking about projections of a 17 or 18-year-old kid, what they're going to be like as a 23-year-old, I would think that intangible side of the character is a big driver to how those skills project. So although you're watching a lot of hockey games, you must be investing a lot of time in figuring out, hey, what makes these guys tick and what are they like on the inside?
100%. And again, I can only speak for the Buffalo Sabres. Obviously, I'm not working with them anymore. They made a lot of changes there. But the people that put our book together, they've been in the game a long, long time. And that was their number one priority is character. It really was. I mean, you look at, and again, I don't know for sure, but typically all your leaders have tremendous amount of character. All your captains have character. All your assistants have character. And I've always said that skill will get you in the door. Character will keep you in the room. And it's who you are as a person. And I think it starts at home. Like little simple things, picking up after yourself. If you have good habits, be respectful, be polite, hold the door open for somebody, and care about your appearance. Just treat people the way you want to be treated. And I think that's where the character starts. And once you have that, and then you have a good work ethic, and then it becomes a habit, and then it becomes a lifestyle. And it just goes on and on and on. And it can go the other way too, right? Like, I mean, if you go down that wrong path, it's tough to, get back on the right one. So character is who you are.
Yeah, no, that's cool. One of the things I did, Mark, you might like it or not, but as an Adam coach, my first year, I was like thinking about that, right? Like, how do we kind of ingrain some character things, some accountability, some respect for the sport, right? In this was at the time 9 and 10-year-olds, right? So one of the things I came up with in the first speech was I'm like, if we're going to play on this team, it was a traveling team, it wasn't a house team, right? I was like, your parents don't touch your gear anymore. So the parents were in the room, right? I was like, they don't touch it. You carry it in, you air it out, you're responsible for getting your skates sharpened. I don't want to see one mom or dad dragging your gear in, right? And some of the parents were looking at me like I was crazy, but like for me, it was like that's that little piece of like, now you start appreciating, right, what's going on around you and what it matters, and these are your tools of your trade, and it kind of starts, they start thinking about things differently, right? And it's not mom's fault if the elbow pad isn't there; it's your fault, and now you have to have, there's repercussions and consequences to that, to you not being accountable to your tools. So, anyways, I mean, do you think that's kind of what you're talking about there? With
100%. And you know what? And it should be like that. And we've created that society. Jason, you look at the bags now; they got wheels on them. We're just trying to make it easier for them, right? Where we all know that life isn't easy, but that's the simplest thing. They're 10, 11, 12 years old. They can carry their own bag, right?
Yeah.
Making your own bed, clean up after yourself. Just the littlest things, mean the biggest thing. And people take notice of that. And you were probably, your families or your parents were probably, thank goodness, thank God, I don't have to carry the little bugger's bag anymore, right? Because it's going to get to a point. Well, when do they start carrying their bag? Is there a code? Right? Is there a code for that? Fill your own water bottle up. Take your own stick out.
Yeah.
So that's awesome.
That's
good for you.
My first guest who you mentioned was Kevin Peterson on the show, episode 1, and we had a great conversation. And he actually brought that up. He said, going back into the brick kind of scenario, right? Like those 9-year-old kids that, he was responsible for, being on the bench with. And so he's seen a lot of great players come through, at that 9-year-old level. And he said it was amazing how often, like, that those kids that were good players were also the guys that would fill up their own water bottle, or they're also the guys that were taping their own stick. They were also the guys, that had this level of accountability about themselves and within the sport that ended up going on and being professionals and having great careers. So I don't think we're blowing smoke and mirrors here. I think this is a real deal, and that's the one thing that I'm really passionate about speaking about, and especially with parents and on this platform, is that, don't clear the way. Like you say, the bags with the wheels, like don't allow the adversity to happen. Allow them to have to muddle their way through it and figure it out, because that's the stuff that's going to give them the grit and the grease to be able to, to be successful, whatever it is they want to be.
That's not adversity, really. That's just, sooner or later you're going to have to do it. But when society said, well, you're only going to start doing it when you're 14, like even at junior level, like, God, like, carry your own bag. Like, we'd make everybody clean the bus, not just the rookies. We'd make everybody, like, I'm 100 years old now, Jason. I was unloading the bus. Right. Like, 3:00 in the morning, I'd be the first one unloading the bus. I'm not better than anybody. But if they see me doing it, and as far as parents are concerned, like, yeah, if you're going to let them do it, if you're going to let them not carry their bag, you know what they're going to do? They're not going to carry their bag.
Right.
Right? See,
Yeah.
Mom, get my bag. Dad,
Yeah.
carry my stick. You know what? No, it's yours. Like you say, it's your tool of your trade. They look after you. You better look after them.
Yeah.
So
100%.
good for you. That's awesome.
No, cool. And I'm glad you mentioned the cleaning the bus too. Have you ever read the book Legacy? Have you heard that one?
I'm a big fan. I got something though that's pretty interesting. It's a long story. Make it short. Went to a funeral. I ran into a fella, and the family was from New Zealand. And I ended up talking to him. Very interesting man. Like, they had come over from New Zealand. They were originally from there. The fellow that passed away. So I talked to him for like 3 hours, and I finally asked him. I said, "What do you do?" He goes, "Well, I coach coaches." No, I'm not really sure what that means. He goes, "Well, that's our version of sports psychology over in New Zealand." I said, "Well, for who?" He goes, "For the All Black rugby team."
Oh, wow.
So he had actually sent me their case study of he got me hooked on Legacy, so I read it and I got it highlighted, front to back. But this case study is like, wow, cleaning the shed.
Yeah.
Right? Cleaning
That's what I was
the
going to
shed.
talk about. I mean, sweep the sheds.
Yeah.
Sweep the sheds.
Yeah. And it's not, it's the old players. Like, look after your room. That's your room. Look after it. Look after your gear. And a quote in there is awesome. Is this isn't your jersey. You're just looking after it. It's not yours.
Yeah.
So great book. If people haven't read it, unbelievable.
Yeah, no, and I'll just clean up the dust there on that one. Like they went through it. For those who aren't familiar with rugby or whatever, the All Blacks are a historic, like, world class rugby team. It's their national team that's been around for 100 years. New Zealand obviously is a small little country, and they compete on a world stage consistently. It's one of the most winningest franchises ever. But there was a period of time where they weren't successful for a while. They were falling away from what they were all about, and they retooled everything, and they got away from the person. I mean, that was my biggest takeaway. Like, they started recruiting and attracting the best people that they could, and they built all these tenets around the team on character and on people, and then they started to rebuild this this tradition that they had. And real powerful book. Any coach, any parent out there, I mean, you definitely can get something from that book. But Mark, I think we'll wind her down here. Awesome guest. I knew you'd be great to talk to. Love the stories. I love the insight, and just really want to congratulate you on such success that you've had there behind the bench and in your time, not only as a player but away from the game. And I know right now you got a little bit of pause on what's going on there, but I know you'll come up stronger than ever in whatever it is you want to do. So thanks so much for being here today,
Jason. I appreciate it. I'm going to leave you with a story though. Okay?
Beauty.
Okay. This is, I felt like I played a long time, and you would remember this coach, Tommy McVie. Remember Tommy McVie?
Yeah, I remember that name. Yeah, he coached didn't he?
Yeah, he scouts for Boston now. He coached in New Jersey. He was coach of the year in New Jersey. He was kind of in the Scotty Bowman era.
Yeah.
Right. So they both coach, but I never had the opportunity to play for Tommy. He's still around. I think he lives in Seattle or Washington area, but I got a funny story about Tommy McVie. It's one of my favorites. So he was coaching in Utica in the minors, and they, again, character, it was tough. It was different back then, right? Just different. He had a good player in Jeff Medill. I'm not sure if you know the name. Real good minor league player. But I don't know if self-proclaimed, self-nickname, we call him, he was Mad Dog Medill. Jeff Mad Dog Medill. Maybe he's a little chubby. Okay, a little bit overweight, which was fine back then. So, and if you know Tommy McVie, he had a little bit of a darker, deep voice, like you talk like this. And so this is how the story goes. So they're in the dressing room, and Tommy's not very happy with the Mad Dog. Goes in there, "Hey, Mad Dog, there's two things that are going to keep you out of the NHL." Really? Like, how am I going to get to the NHL? Like I said, there's two things going to keep you out of the NHL, you fat bastard. It's a knife and a fork. But that's the character of even the coaches back then. So that was one of my favorite stories with Tommy McVie, that he told a kid who wasn't going to get to the NHL, there was two things. And it was called a knife and a fork because he was overweight. But great story by.
Yeah, and there's some honesty to that too, I'm sure, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, no, thanks again, and thanks for everyone tuning in today. There's a lot of people saying thanks, Mark.
Absolutely, I enjoy this.
We were here live. They said they really appreciate it. Had a great job. Loved it. Thank you. So, yeah, it's great that we were able to do this. I think that went well. Being here live in the group and having some people interact and allow them to get their questions in too, because I think that's really what I like doing here with this, is allow the accessibility, because it's awesome for me to have the conversation, be able to bring it out, but there's questions that other people have that are very relevant to them in their own situation. So being able to open up the door to that and talk with someone like you, I think is pretty cool. So,
well, I appreciate
thanks for doing that, Mark.
Yeah, 100%, Jason. Appreciate it. Thanks very much.
And thanks for everyone listening. And that takes us to the end of Up My Hockey with Mark Ferner here, episode 24. Thanks so much, everybody. Well, thank you so much for being here today. I really enjoyed my time with Mark, as did the Facebook group that were able to partake with that interview live. Once again, we mentioned a couple times during the interview, but if you want to join the group, it's at Up My Hockey /parent group. It's a private group you need to request, and if you have kids and you're involved in getting closer access to some of these amazing guests that I'm bringing on, get your name mentioned on the air, ask your question personally, by all means, please join us there. The group is growing and it's a lot of fun. Mark, what an awesome interview. He is so engaging and he's so insightful and just dropping nuggets everywhere. And I just really found myself nodding my head a ton while he was speaking, because it's a truth. His philosophies are truths to me in how I approach the game of hockey, with whether it's me coaching a team or whether it's me parenting my kids or whether it's the clients that I'm working with one-on-one, that all these intangibles are big deals, and they're the difference makers for most players and for most organizations, because scouts and coaches and organizations are looking for guys they want to have in the locker room. A lot of times we're always focused on what type of player is on the ice, but we have to understand that the player in the locker room matters a ton, and who that player is in the locker room is indicative of how good of a player they're going to be on the ice too, because they're going to push their ability, they're going to push their work ethic, they're going to push their standards, they're going to bring everyone else around them up, they're going to make the environment safe and challenging and competitive. So you've heard it from me time and time again. The key to success is to focus on things between your ears that you can control. You know, your mindset, your character, your determination, your focus, all these things that are within our control. And if we apply the intention to them, then all of a sudden, man, you start getting that special secret sauce that makes us a really, really powerful force on the ice. So, Mark, thank you so much for sharing your details with us today. And until next time, play hard. Keep your head up.